In the winter of 1887, a blizzard howled through the Wyoming Territory like a banshee's cry, claiming lives and breaking hearts. At the lonesome train station in Cheyenne, a woman sat frozen on a wooden bench, her breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. She clutched a small leather bag containing everything she owned: $3, a faded photograph, and a heart full of dreams that seemed as cold as the night itself. What happened next would become the most talked-about love story from the Colorado River to the Canadian border, changing two lives forever and making history in the untamed American West. The wind cut through Cheyenne like a knife through butter that December night. Elizabeth Libby Montgomery pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, but it did little to keep out the cold. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, and her lips were turning blue. The last train east had left 3 hours past, and the next wouldn't come until morning if the storm didn't block the tracks. Libby had been a nurse back in Philadelphia, working in the charity hospital where she'd learned to tend wounds, deliver babies, and comfort the dying. But when the scandal broke, when Dr. Harrison tried to force himself on her, and she'd fought back, breaking his nose with a bedpan, nobody would believe her word against his. The hospital dismissed her, and word spread through the medical community like wildfire. No respectable hospital would hire her, so she'd taken what little money she had and bought a train ticket west, hoping to find work in one of the mining towns where they were desperate for anyone with medical knowledge. But her money had run out in Cheyenne, and the boarding house had turned her away when she couldn't pay for another night. Now she sat on this hard bench, watching her breath fog in the air, wondering if she'd freeze to death before dawn. Her small leather medical bag sat beside her, the only thing of value she owned, containing her surgical tools, medicines, and the few certificates that proved her training. The sound of horse hooves on frozen ground made her look up. Through the swirling snow, she saw a figure approaching on horseback. The man was large, wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. As he drew closer, she could see his horse was a magnificent black stallion, and the man's clothes, though practical, were of fine quality. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, then walked toward the station. His boots were expensive leather, she noticed, and he moved with the confident stride of a man accustomed to having his way. When he pushed through the station door, a gust of wind and snow followed him inside. "Evening, miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deep and warm, with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas. "Mighty cold night to be sitting out here alone." Libby tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She managed a small nod. The man studied her with concerned eyes. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair and a mustache, and despite the rough weather, he was clean-shaven and well-groomed. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but his eyes were kind. "Name's Jack Thornton," he said, pulling off his gloves. "I own the Double T Ranch about 20 miles north of here. Been in town on business, and was heading home when I saw you through the window." He noticed her medical bag and the way she was dressed. Her clothes were quality but worn, and she had the bearing of an educated woman, despite her obvious poverty. "Are you a doctor, miss?" he asked gently. "A nurse," Libby managed to say through chattering teeth. "Elizabeth Montgomery from Philadelphia." Jack's eyes widened. A trained nurse was rarer than gold in Wyoming Territory. Most towns were lucky to have a barber who could pull teeth and set bones. "Miss Montgomery, you're going to freeze to death if you stay here much longer," he said, his voice filled with concern. "The storm's getting worse, and this station isn't heated. Please, let me take you somewhere warm." Libby looked at him with a mixture of hope and weariness. She'd learned not to trust men too easily, but she was desperate, and something about this Jack Thornton seemed different from the men she'd known back east. There was a gentleness in his manner, despite his obvious strength. I don't have money for a hotel," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not your concern right now," Jack said firmly. "Getting you warm and fed is what matters. We can sort out the rest later." He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still carrying his body heat, made her gasp with relief. The coat smelled of leather, horses, and something else, perhaps pine soap. "Can you walk?" he asked. Libby tried to stand, but her legs were too stiff from the cold. Without hesitation, Jack scooped her up in his arms, her medical bag included. She was light as a feather, he thought, and trembling like a leaf in a windstorm. The hotel's just across the street, he said, carrying her toward the door. We'll get you warmed up and fed, and then you can tell me what brings a trained nurse to Wyoming Territory in the middle of winter. As they stepped out into the storm, Libby found herself pressed against Jack's chest, his strong arms holding her securely. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She didn't know this man, didn't know his intentions, but somehow she trusted him. Maybe it was the desperate situation, or maybe it was something in his eyes, a kindness she hadn't seen in far too long. The Cattleman's Hotel was the finest establishment in Cheyenne, and when Jack Thornton walked through the front door carrying a half-frozen woman, every head in the lobby turned. The desk clerk, a thin man named Perkins, hurried over with obvious concern. "Mr. Thornton, sir, what happened?" "Found this lady at the train station near frozen to death," Jack said, still holding Libby in his arms. "I need your best room, and send up hot food, coffee, and plenty of blankets. Also, get Doc Williams if he's still in town, right away." "Right away, sir," Perkins said, grabbing a key from the board. "Room 12, second floor. Shall I help carry her?" "I've got her," Jack replied, heading for the stairs. Libby was aware of the stairs and whispers as Jack carried her through the hotel, but she was too cold and exhausted to care about her reputation. The warmth of the building was making her fingers and toes tingle painfully as feeling returned to them. Jack carried her into a spacious room with a large bed, a fireplace, and fine furniture. He set her gently on a chair by the fire and immediately began building up the flames. "The hotel will send up some ladies' clothes," he said, not looking at her as he worked with the fire. "Yours are damp from the snow. We need to get you warm and dry." A knock at the door announced the arrival of hot coffee, soup, and blankets. Jack tipped the boy generously and sent him away, then poured Libby a cup of coffee with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. "Drink this slowly," he said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Too much heat too fast can be dangerous." Libby sipped the coffee gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "You seem to know something about medicine yourself," she observed, her voice growing stronger. Jack smiled. "You learn a few things running a ranch. Men get hurt, animals get sick, and the nearest doctor might be 100 miles away. But I'm no trained nurse. What brought you west, Miss Montgomery, if you don't mind my asking?" Libby studied his face in the firelight. He had honest eyes, she decided, and after what he'd done for her tonight, he deserved some explanation. "I worked in a hospital in Philadelphia," she said carefully. "There was trouble. A doctor who wouldn't take no for an answer. When I defended myself, I was dismissed. No hospital back east would hire me after that." Jack's jaw tightened, and she saw anger flash in his eyes. "A man forced himself on you." "He tried to," Libby said. "I broke his nose with a bedpan." Despite the serious nature of the conversation, Jack's mouth twitched with the hint of a smile. "Good for you. I hope it hurt." "It did," Libby said, and for the first time in months, she almost smiled too. "But it cost me my career. I thought maybe in the West, where doctors are scarce, my past wouldn't matter so much." "It doesn't," Jack said firmly. "Out here we judge people by what they do, not by the lies told about them back east. A trained nurse is worth her weight in gold in this territory." Another knock interrupted them, and a hotel maid entered with an armload of women's clothing. "Begging your pardon, sir, but these are the finest we have. Mrs. Patterson and roommate donated them. Any woman caught in this storm deserves all the help we can give." "Thank Mrs. Patterson for her kindness," Jack said, standing. "I'll wait downstairs while Miss Montgomery changes." "Mr. Thornton," Libby called as he reached the door. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." Jack paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone in the world," he said quietly. "And maybe because I've been praying for someone like you to come along." "Someone like me?" "A healer," he said. "My ranch hands get hurt regular, and I've lost good men because there was no one to tend them properly. But more than that," he turned to face her fully, "I've been looking for someone special, someone with strength and courage, someone who'd break a man's nose rather than let him take what isn't his." With that, he left the room, closing the door gently behind him. Libby sat by the fire staring at the closed door. She'd expected many things when she came west, but she'd never expected to meet a man like Jackson Thornton. Rich enough to own his own ranch, kind enough to help a stranger, and respectful enough to leave her alone to change clothes without being asked. She looked at the clothes the maid had brought, a simple but well-made dress of blue wool, undergarments, stockings, and even a pair of boots that looked like they might fit. As she changed out of her damp, travel-stained clothes, she couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt a spark of hope. Libby woke to sunlight streaming through the hotel window and the distant sound of voices from the street below. The storm had passed, leaving the world covered in pristine white snow. She'd slept better than she had in weeks, warm and safe for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. A soft knock at the door made her sit up. "Miss Montgomery, it's Jack Thornton." "Just a moment," she called, quickly braiding her long brown hair and smoothing the borrowed dress. When she opened the door, she found Jack standing in the hallway with a breakfast tray. "Morning," he said with a smile that made her heart skip. "Thought you might be hungry. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," she said, stepping aside to let him enter. "Mr. Thornton, I don't know how to repay your kindness." "Jack," he corrected, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "And you don't owe me anything, though I was hoping we might talk about your plans." They sat across from each other as Libby ate the hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and jam. The food was delicious, and she realized how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal. "I don't have many plans," she admitted. "I was hoping to find work in one of the mining camps, but I'm not sure how to get there or even which camps might need a nurse." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Mining camps are rough places for a woman alone. Dangerous, too. Most of those men haven't seen a decent woman in months, and they don't always remember their manners." "I can take care of myself," Libby said with quiet determination. "I'm sure you can," Jack agreed. "But there might be another option. My ranch covers 50,000 acres, and I employ about 60 men year-round. During roundup and branding season, that number goes up to nearly 100. These men work hard and get hurt regular, broken bones, cuts, burns, snake bites, you name it." Libby set down her coffee cup, interested. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering you a position as the ranch's nurse," Jack said. "Good pay, comfortable quarters, and all the medical supplies you need. You'd have your own cabin near the main house, and Cookie, that's our cook, would make sure you're well fed." It sounded almost too good to be true. "What would you expect in return?" Jack's expression grew serious. "Honest work for honest pay. Tend the men when they're hurt, help with difficult births among the livestock when needed, and maybe teach some of the hands basic first aid. Nothing more than that. And you'd expect nothing personal?" Understanding dawned in Jack's eyes. "Miss Montgomery, Libby, I'm not the kind of man who'd take advantage of a woman's desperate situation. If something personal were to develop between us, it would be because we both wanted it, not because you felt obligated." Libby studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but his eyes were clear and honest, and everything about his behavior since finding her had been that of a gentleman. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. 20 miles north. It's called the Double T, after my initials, Jackson Thomas Thornton. We raise cattle and horses, some of the finest in Wyoming Territory. The work is hard, but honest, and the men who ride for me are good people." "You said you've been looking for a healer. Haven't you tried to hire a doctor?" Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've tried. Posted notices in newspapers from Denver to Kansas City. Most doctors want to practice in towns where they can build a profitable practice treating wealthy patients. Ranch work is too uncertain, too dangerous, and not profitable enough for most of them." "But you'd hire a woman?" "I'd hire anyone with the skills and courage to do the job," Jack said firmly. "Out here we care more about what a person can do than whether they wear pants or a dress." Libby considered the offer. It was better than anything she dared hope for, but it seemed too perfect. There had to be a catch. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. Jack smiled appreciatively. "Smart as well as skilled. All right, here's the truth of it. The Double T is a working ranch, not a fancy estate. The winters are hard, the summers are hot, and we're 20 miles from the nearest town. You'd be the only woman on the ranch most of the time, except for Cookie's wife, Martha, who helps in the kitchen. It can be lonely." "I've been lonely in cities full of people," Libby said quietly. "At least ranch loneliness would be honest." "There's something else," Jack continued. "I'm not just the owner of the Double T. My family has money, quite a bit of it. My father made a fortune in shipping before the war, and I've done well with investments in addition to the ranch. Some people might say you're trying to catch yourself a wealthy husband." Libby's chin came up defiantly. Let them say what they want. I know my own heart and intentions. I believe you do, Jack said softly. But I wanted you to know what you might be walking into. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow-covered street through the window. Finally, Libby spoke. When would you want me to start? Jack's face lit up with a smile that transformed his weathered features. Does that mean you'll take the position? It means I'll try it, Libby said carefully. If it doesn't work out for either of us, I'll move on with no hard feelings. Fair enough, Jack said, standing and extending his hand. Welcome to the Double T, Nurse Montgomery. As Libby shook his hand, she felt a spark of electricity pass between them. From the look in Jack's eyes, he felt it too. This job might be more complicated than she'd thought, but for the first time in months, she was looking forward to the future. The ride to the Double T Ranch took 3 hours through snow-covered countryside that took Libby's breath away. Jack had bought her a warm coat, riding boots, and other necessities in Cheyenne, refusing to take no for an answer when she protested the expense. Consider it in advance on your salary, he'd said with a grin that was becoming familiar now. As they rode side by side through the Wyoming wilderness, Libby felt a sense of freedom she'd never experienced back east. The landscape was vast and beautiful, with snow-capped mountains in the distance and endless sky overhead. Jack pointed out landmarks along the way, a creek where they watered their horses, a grove of cottonwood trees that provided shelter during summer roundups, and finally the boundary markers of the Double T. There she is, Jack said with obvious pride as they crested a hill. Libby gasped at the sight below them. The Double T Ranch sprawled across a valley like a small town. The main house was large and well-built, constructed of logs and stone with a wide front porch. Nearby stood a bunkhouse, stables, corrals, a blacksmith shop, and various other outbuildings. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could see men working despite the cold weather. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Wait until spring, Jack replied, when the grass is green and the wildflowers are blooming. There's no prettier sight in all of Wyoming. As they rode into the ranch yard, men began emerging from various buildings to greet them. Word of Jack's mission to town had obviously spread, and they were all curious about the woman riding beside their boss. Boys, Jack called out as he dismounted, I want you to meet Miss Elizabeth Montgomery. She's our new nurse. A cheer went up from the assembled men, and Libby felt her cheeks redden. One grizzled cowboy with gray whiskers stepped forward. Name's Tom Bradley, Mississippi. I'm the foreman here. Can't tell you how glad we are to have someone with medical training on the ranch. Thank you, Mr. Bradley, Libby said as Jack helped her down from her horse. I hope I can be of help. Oh, you will be, said another man with a bandaged hand. I cut myself on some barbed wire yesterday, and it's been painting me something fierce. I'll take a look at it after I get settled, Libby promised. Jack led her toward a small but well-built cabin about 50 yards from the main house. This will be your home, he said, opening the door. The cabin was simple but comfortable, with a main room that served as both living area and office, a small bedroom, and a kitchen with a wood stove. A fire had already been lit in the fireplace, and the rooms were warm and welcoming. Cookie's wife, Martha, stocked the kitchen with supplies, Jack explained, and I had some of the boys bring over furniture and linens. If you need anything else, just let me know. Libby walked around the cabin, touching the simple wooden furniture and admiring the view from the windows. One looked toward the mountains, another toward the main house and ranch buildings. It was perfect. There's one more thing, Jack said, leading her to a room she hadn't noticed. I thought you might need this. He opened the door to reveal a fully equipped medical office. There was an examination table, cabinets full of supplies, surgical instruments, and medicines. Everything was clean and well organized, better equipped than some hospitals she'd worked in back east. Jack, she breathed, overwhelmed. This must have cost a fortune. A good nurse is worth a fortune, he said simply. Besides, I ordered most of this months ago hoping I'd eventually find someone to use it. Libby felt tears prick her eyes. After months of rejection and hardship, this kindness was almost too much to bear. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Jack said with a smile. Wait until you've seen what some of these cowboys can do to themselves. You'll earn every penny of your salary. As if to prove his point, there was a knock at the door. Tom Bradley entered, supporting a young cowboy who was hopping on one foot. Sorry to bother you, miss, but Billy here just got stepped on by his horse, Tom said. Bring him into the medical room, Libby said immediately, shifting into professional mode. Let's get that boot off and see what we're dealing with. As she examined Billy's injured foot, bruised but not broken, thankfully, Libby was aware of Jack watching from the doorway. When she looked up after bandaging the foot and giving Billy instructions for care, she found him smiling. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. Just thinking that this might work out even better than I hoped. That evening, after treating 3 more minor injuries and meeting most of the ranch hands, Libby sat in her new cabin trying to process everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she'd been freezing and penniless at a train station. Now she had a job, a home, and the respect of the men she'd be working with. And then there was Jack Thornton himself. He was nothing like the men she'd known back east, neither the refined but weak gentlemen of society, nor the crude men who tried to take advantage of her vulnerability. Jack was strong but gentle, wealthy but unpretentious, and he treated her as an equal while still being protective. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Jack standing on her porch with a steaming cup in his hands. Thought you might like some hot chocolate before bed, he said. Martha makes the best in Wyoming Territory. That's very thoughtful, Libby said, accepting the cup gratefully. Would you like to come in for a few minutes? Jack hesitated. I don't want to compromise your reputation. I think my reputation can survive a brief conversation with my employer, Libby said with a smile. Besides, who's going to see us way out here? Jack entered and took a seat by the fireplace while Libby settled into the chair across from him. The hot chocolate was indeed delicious, rich and warming. How are you settling in? He asked. Better than I dared hope, she admitted. The men have been very respectful. The cabin is perfect, and that medical room is better equipped than some city hospitals. Good, Jack said, then fell silent, staring into the fire. What is it? Libby asked, sensing something troubling him. I want to be honest with you about something, he said finally. When I found you at that train station, it wasn't entirely by chance. Libby set down her cup, suddenly wary. What do you mean? I'd been in town on business, yes, but I was also making inquiries about finding a nurse or doctor for the ranch. The hotel clerk mentioned that a woman with medical training had been asking about work earlier that day. I went to the station hoping to find you. So you knew who I was? I knew a trained nurse was supposed to be on the evening train from the east, Jack said. I didn't know your name or your circumstances until I found you there. Libby considered this. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because I wanted you to take the job based on its merits, not because you felt obligated to the man who rescued you. It made sense, and Libby found herself respecting him even more for his honesty. Is there anything else I should know? Jack met her eyes directly. I'm attracted to you, Libby. Have been since the moment I saw you sitting in that station. But I want you to know that your job here is secure, regardless of your personal feelings toward me. I won't pressure you or make your position here dependent on anything other than your professional skills. Libby felt her heart skip a beat. The attraction was mutual, but she appreciated his straightforwardness. Thank you for being honest, she said softly. And for the record, the attraction isn't one-sided. They looked at each other across the firelight, both aware that something significant was beginning between them, but they also both knew it was too soon, too complicated by their employer-employee relationship. Well, Jack said, standing, I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow Cookie wants to show you around the kitchen gardens, and Martha's eager to give you the full tour of the ranch. Jack, Libby called as he reached the door. Thank you for everything. I haven't felt this hopeful about the future in a very long time. Neither have I, he said quietly, and then he was gone, leaving Libby alone with her thoughts in the warm glow of possibility. Spring came early to Wyoming Territory that year, and with it, Libby settled into her new life at the Double T Ranch. She treated everything from broken bones to snake bites, delivered foals and calves, and even helped Martha in the kitchen garden when her medical duties were light. The Cowboys had come to trust and respect her, often seeking her advice on matters that had nothing to do with medicine. But it was her growing relationship with Jack that occupied most of her thoughts. He was careful to maintain professional boundaries during the day, but their evening conversations on her cabin porch had become a cherished routine. They talked about everything: his dreams for the ranch, her experiences back east, their hopes for the future. One evening in late April, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Jack brought up a subject that had been weighing on his mind. Libby, "There's something I need to tell you about my past," he said, his voice unusually serious. She set down her coffee cup and gave him her full attention. "What is it?" "I was married before," Jack said quietly. "Her name was Rebecca. We were childhood sweethearts back in Texas, married when I was 22. Libby felt a stab of jealousy, followed immediately by guilt. Of course a man like Jack would have been married before. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. "Fever took her 3 years ago," Jack said, pain evident in his voice. "We'd been trying to have children, but it never happened. When she died, I thought my chance at happiness died with her." "I'm sorry," Libby said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "She must have been very special." "She was," Jack agreed. "But she was also nothing like you. Rebecca was gentle and delicate, content to stay home and tend her flowers. You're strong, independent, willing to face challenges head-on. I love that about you, Libby." Libby's heart stopped. "Jack, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know we work together and that complicates things, but I can't pretend anymore that my feelings for you are just professional respect." "Mine aren't either," Libby admitted. "But you're right, it is complicated. What would the men think? What would people in town say?" "I don't care what they say," Jack said firmly. "But I care what you think, what you want." Before Libby could answer, Tom Bradley came running up to the cabin, his face pale with worry. "Boss, Miss Libby, there's been an accident. Lightning spooked the horses and young Danny got trampled. He's hurt bad." Libby was on her feet instantly, her personal feelings pushed aside by professional duty. "Where is he?" "Bunkhouse," Tom replied. "Cookie and some of the boys carried him there." Libby ran to the medical room to grab her supplies while Jack saddled horses to ride for the doctor in Cheyenne. But when she reached the bunkhouse and saw Danny's injuries, she knew there wasn't time to wait for the doctor. The 18-year-old cowboy was unconscious, his chest crushed, and his breathing labored. Internal bleeding was obvious, and Libby knew she had to operate immediately or lose him. "Clear a table," she ordered the gathered men. "I need lots of light, hot water, and clean sheets. Tom, I need you to assist me." "Miss Libby," Tom said uncertainly, "shouldn't we wait for the doc?" "He'll be dead before the doctor gets here," Libby said firmly. "I've done this surgery before. We can save him, but we have to act now." For the next 3 hours, Libby worked over Danny's broken body, repairing internal damage and setting bones. The cowboys watched, hushed and anxious, in awed silence as she performed what seemed like miracles with her skilled hands. When she finally stepped back, exhausted but triumphant, Danny's breathing was steady and his color had improved. "He'll live," she announced, and the bunkhouse erupted in cheers. Jack, who had returned with the doctor an hour earlier, watched from the doorway with undisguised admiration. When the doctor examined Danny and pronounced Libby's work as fine as any surgeon in Denver could have done, Jack's pride was evident to everyone present. Later that night, after Danny had been moved to the cabin next to Libby's for easier monitoring, she and Jack finally had a chance to talk. "What you did tonight," Jack said as they sat on her porch in the moonlight, "it was incredible. You saved that boy's life." "It's what any trained nurse would have done," Libby said modestly. "No," Jack said firmly. "It's what you did, and it's why I love you." There it was, out in the open. Libby looked at this man who had rescued her from freezing, given her a home and meaningful work, and now looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you too," she said simply. Jack leaned over and kissed her then, gentle and sweet under the star-filled Wyoming sky. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Marry me, Libby," Jack said. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I can't imagine my life without you now." "Jack," Libby began, but he held up a hand. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said. "Just promise me you'll think about it." "I will," she promised, though in her heart she already knew her answer. Word of Jack's proposal spread through the ranch faster than wildfire, and to Libby's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. The cowboys had come to love and respect her, and they could see how happy she made their boss. Even Tom Bradley, initially skeptical about having a woman on the ranch, gave the match his wholehearted approval. "Never seen the boss smile so much," he told Libby one morning as she checked on Danny's recovery. "You're good for him, miss. Good for all of us." The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in June, and it became the social event of the season in that part of Wyoming Territory. Cowboys from neighboring ranches, townspeople from Cheyenne, and even some of Jack's business associates from Denver came to witness the union of the millionaire rancher and his nurse. Libby wore a dress of ivory silk that Jack had ordered specially from San Francisco, and Martha had woven wildflowers from the prairie into her hair. She looked radiant as she walked down the makeshift aisle between the ranch buildings, with Tom Bradley proudly escorting her in place of the father she'd lost years earlier. Jack waited at the altar they'd constructed on the front porch of the main house, dressed in his finest black suit, but looking more nervous than Libby had ever seen him. When their eyes met, however, his nervousness disappeared, replaced by a smile of pure joy. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher who traveled through the territory, and his words about love, commitment, and partnership seemed especially meaningful given how Jack and Libby had found each other. Do you, Jackson Thomas Thornton, take Elizabeth Rose Montgomery to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Jack said firmly, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. And do you, Elizabeth Rose Montgomery, take Jackson Thomas Thornton to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Libby replied, her voice strong and sure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack's kiss was passionate enough to draw cheers and whistles from the Cowboys. Libby blushed, but didn't pull away, secure in the love they shared. The celebration that followed was legendary. Cookie had outdone himself with a feast that included roasted beef, fresh trout, vegetables from Martha's garden, and a three-tiered wedding cake that had been transported carefully from Denver. There was music, dancing, and storytelling that went on well into the night. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Danny, still recovering from his injuries but determined to attend the wedding, stood to make a toast. To Mrs. Thornton, he said, raising his glass of lemonade. He was still too weak for alcohol. The woman who saved my life and made our boss the happiest man in Wyoming Territory. May your love story inspire generations to come. The crowd erupted in agreement, and Libby found herself crying happy tears as Jack squeezed her hand. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Jack and Libby found themselves alone on the porch of the main house, which would now be their home together. Well, Mrs. Thornton, Jack said, taking her hands in his. How does it feel to be a married woman? It feels like coming home, Libby replied honestly. Like everything that happened before was just preparing me for this moment. Jack pulled her close, and they danced slowly to the music drifting from the bunkhouse, where some of the Cowboys were still celebrating. I have something for you, Jack said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a beautiful gold locket. Jack, it's beautiful, Libby breathed as he fastened it around her neck. Open it, he urged. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them, taken earlier that day, and engraved on the opposite side were the words, "Forever and always, JT. Now you'll always have me close to your heart," Jack said softly. I already do, Libby whispered and kissed him under the star-filled Wyoming sky. The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges to Jack and Libby Thornton. Libby continued her work as the ranch nurse, but now she also took on the role of ranch wife, helping Jack with the business side of the operation and entertaining the important visitors who came to buy cattle and horses. She proved to be a natural at both roles. Her medical skills became legendary throughout the territory. She successfully treated a cholera outbreak in nearby Silver Creek, delivered twins during a blizzard, and even removed a bullet from a wounded sheriff who'd been chasing rustlers. But it was her partnership with Jack that truly made their marriage special. She had a keen mind for business and often suggested improvements to ranch operations that saved money and increased efficiency. Jack valued her opinions and never made important decisions without consulting her first. Their love story became the talk of Wyoming Territory. Newspaper reporters came from as far away as Chicago to write about the millionaire cowboy and his nurse wife. The story of how Jack had found Libby freezing at the train station was retold around campfires and in saloons from Colorado to Montana. But their happiness was tested when Libby's past came back to haunt them. In the spring of 1889, Dr. Harrison, the man who had tried to assault her in Philadelphia, arrived in Cheyenne claiming to be investigating medical malpractice by unlicensed practitioners. He's come to cause trouble, Libby told Jack as they sat in their bedroom, reading the telegram that had warned them of Harrison's arrival. He's never forgiven me for what I did to him. Let him come, Jack said grimly. He'll find that things are different out here. Harrison arrived at the ranch 3 days later, accompanied by a territorial marshal and carrying official papers questioning Libby's right to practice medicine without a license. He was a thin, pale man with calculating eyes and a permanent sneer that made Libby's skin crawl. Mrs. Thornton, he said with mock politeness, or should I say Miss Montgomery, I'm here to investigate reports of illegal medical practice. My wife is a trained nurse, Jack said, stepping protectively in front of Libby. She has certificates proving her education and experience. Certificates that are meaningless if she's been dismissed from her position for moral turpitude, Harrison replied smoothly. Did you tell your husband about your behavior back in Philadelphia, my dear? I told him about a coward who tried to force himself on me and got his nose broken for his trouble, Libby said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Your word against mine, Harrison said with a smile. And I'm a respected physician while you're just a woman of questionable virtue. That was as far as he got before Jack's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling in the dirt. The marshal reached for his gun, but found himself facing 30 angry cowboys who had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Now see here, the marshal said nervously. I'm a federal officer, and I'm a citizen of Wyoming Territory, Jack said calmly, though his eyes were blazing with anger. You want to question my wife's credentials? Fine. Let's go to town and have a proper hearing. The hearing was held in Cheyenne's courthouse 3 days later, and it seemed like half the territory showed up to support Libby. Patient after patient testified about her skill and compassion. The doctor from Cheyenne spoke eloquently about her surgical abilities. Even the territorial governor, who had met Libby at a social function, sent a letter praising her contributions to the territory's medical care. Harrison's accusations fell apart under scrutiny. It was revealed that he had been dismissed from his own hospital position for drinking and incompetence, and that he had harbored a grudge against Libby for years. When Tom Bradley testified about how Libby had saved Danny's life, performing surgery that no one else in the territory could have done, the judge's decision was swift and decisive. Mrs. Thornton, the judge said, your service to this territory has been exemplary. Your nursing certificate is hereby officially recognized by the territorial government, and you are authorized to practice medicine throughout Wyoming Territory. As for you, Dr. Harrison, I suggest you leave our territory immediately before these good people decide to show you the same hospitality you've shown their beloved nurse. The courtroom erupted in cheers, and Libby found herself swept up in Jack's arms as he spun her around in celebration. It's over, he whispered in her ear. He can't hurt you anymore. We did it together, Libby replied, looking into his eyes. We can face anything together. That night, as they celebrated with their friends and neighbors, Libby realized that her love story with Jack had become something bigger than just their personal happiness. They had become symbols of the American dream, the idea that in the West people could reinvent themselves, that hard work and love could overcome any obstacle. By 1892, 5 years after their marriage, Jack and Libby Thornton had become one of the most influential couples in Wyoming Territory. The Double T Ranch had expanded to over 100,000 acres, and their cattle and horses were renowned throughout the West. But it was their contributions to the community that truly set them apart. Libby had established the first real hospital in the territory, a modern facility in Cheyenne that served patients from hundreds of miles around. She had also started a nursing school, training young women to provide medical care in remote areas. Her innovations in frontier medicine had been written about in medical journals back east, and she had been invited to speak at medical conferences in Boston and New York. Jack had become a political force as well, serving in the territorial legislature and advocating for statehood. He had also invested in railroads, mining, and other businesses that brought prosperity to the region. But perhaps his greatest achievement was the town he had built on the southern border of the ranch, Thornton, Wyoming, complete with schools, churches, shops, and homes for the families of his employees. Their love story had indeed made history, inspiring countless others to take chances on love and new beginnings. But their greatest joy came from the 3 children they had been blessed with, twin boys born in 1890, followed by a daughter in 1892. Little Thomas and Jackson Jr. were already showing signs of their father's love for the land and their mother's compassionate nature. Baby Rebecca, named for Jack's first wife with Libby's blessing, was the light of their lives. "She's going to be a healer like her mother," Jack said one evening as they watched their daughter sleep in her crib. "Look at those gentle hands." "Or a rancher like her father," Libby replied with a smile. "Those hands look strong enough to handle horses." "Maybe both," Jack said, pulling his wife into his arms. "In this family, we believe in unlimited possibilities." As they stood together watching their children sleep, Libby reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that freezing night at the train station to this warm, love-filled home, it had been an adventure beyond her wildest dreams. "Do you ever regret it, Jack?" she asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Leaving Philadelphia? Coming west? Taking a chance on a rough cowboy?" "Never," Libby said firmly. "That night you found me at the station was the luckiest night of my life. Everything that happened before was just preparing me to be your wife and the mother of your children." "I love you, Libby Thornton," Jack said, kissing her forehead. "More than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Jackson Thornton," she replied. "Forever and always." Outside their window, the Wyoming wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, carrying with it the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. In the distance, a cowboy played a soft tune on his harmonica, and the cattle lowed peacefully in the fields. Years later, when historians wrote about the early days of Wyoming, they always included the story of Jack and Libby Thornton. Their love story became legend, told and retold around campfires and in books, inspiring generations of Americans to believe in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. The Double T Ranch continued to thrive under their children's leadership. Thomas became a respected cattleman and served as Wyoming's first state senator. Jackson Jr. became a doctor, following in his mother's footsteps, and established hospitals throughout the growing state. Rebecca married a fellow rancher and raised 6 children of her own, passing down the family stories of courage, love, and perseverance. The town of Thornton grew into a thriving city, and the hospital Libby founded became a major medical center. Her nursing school graduated hundreds of women who carried her legacy of compassionate care throughout the American West. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Jack and Libby's love story was the example they set for others. They proved that love could blossom in the most unlikely circumstances, that two people from different worlds could build a life together based on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unwavering commitment. In the museum in Cheyenne, visitors can still see Libby's medical bag, the one she carried that cold night in 1887 when she sat freezing at the train station. Next to it is Jack's wedding ring and a copy of their marriage certificate. But the real monument to their love isn't in any museum. It's in the hundreds of couples who found inspiration in their story, who took chances on love, who built lives together in the American West. The plaque in the museum reads, "Jackson and Elizabeth Thornton, proof that love can conquer all and that the greatest adventures begin with a single act of kindness." And in the graveyard on the hill overlooking the Double T Ranch, 2 headstones stand side by side under the big Wyoming sky. Jack died in 1923 at age 86, and Libby followed him just 3 months later, unable to bear life without her beloved husband. They are buried together as they lived, hand in hand, heart to heart, their love story complete, but their legend eternal. The inscription on their shared headstone, chosen by their children, reads simply, "Forever and always, a love that made history." Even today, more than a century later, visitors come to Wyoming to see where the famous love story began. They visit the site of the old train station in Cheyenne, tour the Double T Ranch, now a museum, and walk through the town of Thornton. And they leave inspired by the story of a millionaire cowboy who found a freezing nurse at a train station and discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unexpected places. The legend of Jack and Libby Thornton lives on, a testament to the power of love, the promise of the American West, and the truth that every great love story begins with someone caring enough to reach out to a stranger in need. Their love story truly did make history, proving that in the land of endless possibilities, love is the greatest adventure of all.